The penthouse smelled of espresso and dominion, the way it always did on mornings when Bernard Conti ruled the world. Then he let himself fall. He hit the marble hard, his white shirt fanning around him like a burial shroud, and lay still, chest barely rising, eyes sealed shut, gold signet ring catching the light from the floor. 17 hidden cameras, tucked behind oil paintings of men who had also died believing they were loved, recorded every corner of the room. He wanted the truth. After 50 years of building an empire on fear, he finally needed to know what was underneath it. His son arrived first. Bernard heard the footsteps slow, then stop. Then the quiet, deliberate sound of a ring being worked off a limp finger. His daughter didn't even cross the room. She stood by the window, already on her phone, her voice low and businesslike, the word jeweler rising above the silence like smoke. The underboss came last, and he came whispering not prayers, but the names of rival families and how long the body could wait before the wrong people noticed. They gathered in the hallway eventually, his blood and his lieutenants, and Bernard listened through the walls as they argued about documents, accounts, and timelines. Not one voice broke. Not one syllable of grief. The penthouse that had once been his throne now felt like a tomb he had built himself, stone by stone, with every man he had frightened into loyalty instead of earning it. Then, from somewhere down the corridor, came a sound that didn't belong, the soft knock of a plastic bucket against a doorframe, and the quiet, unhurried footsteps of someone who had never once been invited into this room. So tell me, are you enjoying the story and the value so far? If you are, then you're already part of the vibe here. Go ahead and subscribe, drop a like, and introduce yourself in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. The marble was colder than Bernard had expected. He had rehearsed this, the fall, the stillness, the measured half-breath that would pass for death, but nothing had prepared him for the sound of his own empire moving on without him before his body had even cooled. His son Marco was the first through the door. Bernard felt the shadow fall across him, felt the pause, the assessment. Then Marco's voice, barely above a murmur, carved through the silence like a blade. The accounts. We need to move the accounts before anyone outside this family hears a single word. His daughter Lucia arrived seconds later, heels clicking across the marble like a countdown. The police will freeze everything the moment they're called. Every account, every property, her voice dropped, every arrangement. So we don't call them yet. Obviously. Bernard's jaw tightened beneath his stillness. They weren't grieving. They weren't even pretending. They were calculating, voices low and surgical, stepping around his body the way men step around furniture, already dividing a world he had bled to build. Then came Enzo, his underboss, his most trusted lieutenant, the man Bernard had shielded from a murder charge 15 years ago. He heard him crouch close enough that Bernard could smell his cologne, and whisper directly into the silence. We have maybe 2 hours before this becomes a problem we can't control. So someone needs to decide right now, do we manage this quietly, or do we let the wrong people find him first? A beat of cold silence. Then Lucia said, quietly. And somewhere deep in the apartment, a bucket knocked against a doorframe. They didn't even lower their voices. Marco moved to the window, phone already in hand, while Lucia settled into Bernard's own chair, his chair, and crossed her legs like she was inheriting the room by simply occupying it. The Lake Como property goes to me, she said. I've wanted it since I was 12. You'll take what's agreed upon in the will. The will he never updated. She smiled at the ceiling. Which means everything defaults to equal split. Which means I want the villa evaluated before you touch the accounts. They argued over him like he was already furniture. Bernard lay between them on the cold marble, his chest barely moving, his hands still at his sides, listening to his children dismantle 50 years in under 4 minutes. Then Marco said it. Quietly. Almost gently. As though it were simply true and had always been true. Honestly, this was overdue. He was never going to let go willingly. We would have been waiting another 20 years. Lucia didn't disagree. She just smoothed her skirt and reached across the desk toward the locked drawer, the one that held the one thing Bernard had never shown either of them. The drawer that held every name, every secret, every sin. And she was already reaching for the key around his neck. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're part of this story now. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. She wasn't supposed to be on this floor. Elena knew that. She had always known that the penthouse was for family only, and she was not family. She was the woman who replaced the orchids and pretended not to hear things. But the voices had carried down the corridor with an edge she had never heard before, and something older and deeper than her fear of losing her job had pulled her forward. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, bucket in hand, and stopped. He was on the floor. The bucket hit the marble before she realized she'd dropped it. She was across the room in seconds, yellow gloves still on, knees hitting the ground beside him without a single thought about the white uniform she'd ruin. Get up. Enzo's voice was a wall. Get back to your work and don't say a single word about what you've seen in this room. Elena didn't look at him. Her gloved fingers pressed gently to Bernard's neck, feeling for the pulse she was terrified wouldn't be there. It was there. Faint. But there. He needs an ambulance. He needs nothing from you. Enzo stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her entirely. You have until I count to 3 to stand up and walk out of this room. She didn't move. Instead, she pulled the folded cloth from her apron soft, clean, the only soft thing in the room, and tucked it beneath Bernard's head, her lips moving in quiet, urgent prayer. Enzo crouched down until his mouth was at her ear. You just made the worst mistake of your life. They had moved into the adjoining room, but Elena could still hear them. The shredder had been running for 6 minutes. She knew because she had been counting, her hand pressed flat against Bernard's chest, feeling the shallow rise and fall that told her he was still here, still holding on, still, somehow waiting. Marco appeared in the doorway, a stack of folders tucked under his arm, his voice stripped of everything but cold instruction. No one calls anyone until we're finished. 15 minutes. That's all we need. He may not have 15 minutes, Elena said. Then that's God's business, not yours. He disappeared back into the room. The shredder screamed on. Elena looked down at Bernard, at the man she had served for 11 years, whose espresso she had made every morning at precisely 7, whose name she had heard spoken in fear by people twice her size. He had never once learned hers without being reminded. And still, she could not leave him on this floor while his family fed his sins into a machine 10 feet away. She reached into her apron pocket. Her phone was cheap, cracked at the corner, the screen half-dimmed. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She dialed with her thumb and pressed it to her ear before her courage could catch up with her terror. Emergency services, what is your? A man has collapsed. The Conti penthouse, via Monte Napoleone, top floor. He needs help immediately. Please hurry. She ended the call and closed her eyes. The shredder stopped. The silence that followed was the most frightening sound she had ever heard. Then came the footsteps, not 1 set, but 3, moving in unison, slow and deliberate, toward the doorway where she knelt. Enzo's voice arrived first, quieter now than it had ever been. Who did you call? Elena raised her eyes and said nothing. And in that silence, Bernard's fingers barely, impossibly closed around hers. Stay with me until the end, because this story will shock you to the core. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video. Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Now! Marco had already drafted the message. Elena could see it on his phone screen from the floor. Tragic loss. Our father passed this morning. We ask for privacy, thumb hovering over send, the words polished and prepared like everything else in this family. Wait until the shredding is confirmed complete, Lucia said. Then we. Marco's wrist disappeared. Bernard's hand had moved so quietly, so suddenly, that for one suspended second no one in the room processed what had happened. Then Marco made a sound, not a word, something beneath words, as the grip tightened and his phone clattered to the marble. Bernard rose. Not quickly. Not dramatically. He came up from the floor the way a tide comes in, slow, inevitable, impossible to stop once it had begun. He straightened to his full height, smoothed the front of his shirt with his free hand, and looked at his son. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The silence coming off him was a living thing. It moved through the room and touched every person in it, and every person it touched went still. Lucia pressed herself against the desk. Enzo took a single step back. Bernard surveyed them all, and then his eyes moved, deliberately, to Elena on the floor. Something shifted in his face that none of them had ever seen before. He let go of Marco's wrist. The words that followed were not loud. They never needed to be. You have 5 minutes to leave this house. You will take what you're wearing and nothing else. If either of you touches a drawer, a safe, a painting, or a phone that isn't your own, I will know. And you already know what that means. Marco opened his mouth. For minutes and 50 seconds. They left. Not with dignity. Dignity had abandoned this room hours ago, but with the quick, shameful retreat of people who had revealed everything and could no longer pretend otherwise. Lucia didn't look back. Enzo paused in the doorway, something moving across his face that might have once been loyalty. Bernard looked at him for a long moment. You too. Then there was silence. Clean and absolute, for the first time all morning. Bernard turned to Elena, who was still on the floor, yellow gloves in her lap, watching him with the expression of someone who had accepted whatever came next and made peace with it entirely. He crossed the room and extended his hand, not to be helped up, but to help her to her feet. 11 years, he said quietly. And I never once asked your name. Elena. He nodded slowly, something settling in him like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Elena. He said it like it mattered. Like it always should have. I'm rebuilding something. And I need someone with a soul to help me carry it. She looked at the man the whole world feared. I'll need better gloves, she said. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Bernard Conti smiled, just as his phone lit up on the marble floor, Marco's name burning across the screen like a warning.